I Want to Jump Like Dee Dee, with me, Giles Sibbald, is the music podcast that does music a bit differently. I'm talking to some incredible musicians, DJs and producers about how they use an experimental mindset to fuel their own creativity, pursue new challenges, overcome fears, bounce back from mistakes. One of the inspirational things about Nation of Language is really how they came to be, and also, you know, the resilience of mind to get through what's been an incredibly uncertain music landscape to where they are now, which is two really excellent LPs, and you know, with touring now sort of coming up and sort of selling out, like, you know, really the sort of the hottest cakes in town. So that's kind of one thing that I love, and another is obviously the music, which is you know, a kind of modern synthwave infused with sort of 70s and 80s scapes. Really sort of speaks of personal experiences, vulnerability, and humility. And this for me is what makes them very, very relatable. So enough of that, and I've got to say it's a real pleasure to welcome Ian Devaney from Nation of Language to the podcast. Ian, thanks so much, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
So I was like my brain sort of tries to do. I was trying to sort of work out, you know, why your music sort of resonated with me sort of so much. I mean, I'm 53, so I sort of remember I was, you know, kind of like 14 or so when, in around about 82, when that sort of, or 13, 81, you know, when that sort of synth wave was really sort of happening. And for me at the time, it was very, very sort of futuristic. It was involving kind of technology, which was, you know, really sort of different world then. And it was, so for me, it was very kind of exciting. And now it's funny because I sort of relate to it, I think, in a different way. It feels, what the music that you're producing feels much more, in a way, kind of human. There's a real sort of human sort of element to, you know, to sort of what you're producing, which for me is just fantastic. It really kind of takes me back, but also there's this like incredibly human element that makes me really connect with it.
I mean, that's very cool to me. It's funny because I was reading a while ago when we were like mastering the first record, and I was sitting in our mastering engineer studio, just like flipping through books while she's doing her technical work. And it was just like kind of a big coffee table book of music interviews. And I was reading through, and there was a Kraftwerk one, and they were talking about how they wanted to like pull all of the humanity out of the music and just make it like so rigid. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then I like flipped to the next page. It's a Brian Eno interview, and he's talking about how like he wants to imbue synth music with as much humanity as possible. And like he loves synths that are broken because they're like, everything else is perfect. And so something that's broken, that's a machine, is beautiful. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And so there's always this kind of war going on inside of me. And I'm kind of always hoping that I'm walking that line in a way that other people pick up on.
Yeah, no, I know it's I find it fascinating, sort of like, you know, going back to something that's kind of fixed, and then seeing how you sort of feel about it, you know, kind of what emotions it gives you, and then you know, sort of, I mean, I wonder, you know, even, you know, going back to, you know, your sort of first record, which 2018, you know, sort of how you feel about that now, because since then with the new record, A Way Forward, there's been a kind of evolution in a way.
I mean, I still, but there was a part of me that was worried that the fact that we were putting out a second record so soon, that people might think I was trying to like, you know, sort of put this one in front of that and be like, oh, don't look at that first one. But to me, it was much more of a feeling like they lived together nicely. That, you know, because with the first record, I feel like parts of our influences came across very strongly in terms of the sort of like early to mid 80s new wave bands.
Yeah.
But then with the second record, I was like, oh, I want people to also understand that the kind of like late 70s krautrock into those early electronic bands is also something that because they're very distinct in my head in some ways. And so wanting to be able to express both of those quickly and on two separate things where they felt like they were curated to, they are apart, but I wanted them to be appreciated in the same sort of time frame.
In the same sort of, I got you. Yeah. I mean, as well, I mean, again, I think it feels like you're, kind of like very, very, your approach and kind of mindset is very kind of democratic. Like you're showing people your influences and saying this is sort of this is what they mean to me, and the band saying they mean to us, which I think is a great way to do it as a kind of building that kind of relatability, how people sort of relate to you by saying this is what we believe in, this is us.
Yeah, I think I can remember, around probably like 2008, like right when I was leaving in New Jersey and moving to New York to go to college. Which I only went to for like 2 months before I dropped out to do music. But I got obsessed with this band that was also from New Jersey called Titus Andronicus. And they were a band that, like, through being their fan, they were like, oh, like, if you like us, like The Replacements, Mission of Burma, Husker Du, like all of these kind of formative indie bands. And I was like, I eventually would have found these bands, but it's so cool to me that a contemporary band that I'm into can open up a new world to me. And it makes me feel even more invested in their music. And it feels like they're kind of honoring the people that made them want to make music. Yeah. And so I thought that was a cool thing that I want to continue on.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Husker Du there. I mean, they were one of my kind of favorite bands. And one of my kind of life regrets is never getting to see them play. I really wish I had. Oh God, that's anyway. Still great. It's interesting. One thing that I'm also sort of interested in, kind of generally is the impact of your kind of lived environment and your sort of surroundings. And I know you've talked in the past about New York and the mythology, I guess, kind of around it. I remember when I was growing up, because I grew up near Manchester, and Manchester had such a fantastic, kind of musical sort of history with, sort of the Joy Division's, New Order, etc. And I lived about sort of 30 minutes away from there. And I when I was that sort of early teen, I would go there because it just sort of held this kind of mystique.
Yeah.
I came from a small town and I wanted to be there. I wanted to go over there. And it was just so kind of exciting going there and sort of seeing, where this wonderful stuff was being created.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you find yourself wanting to, you're like, maybe like through osmosis, I too can like understand what kind of spark brought these people to the heights that they were able to achieve artistically.
I just thought I just think it's really really kind of interesting, how those sort of, and I wonder about the role of cities. One of my earlier podcast episodes was with, in fact, one of the first ones with Jessica Louise Dye, who is with High Waisted, and she said that because she moved to New York around about 2008, 2009, and kind of didn't know anybody, but she said that New York became the fifth member of her band.
That's very cool.
I thought that was just brilliant. I mean, that just kind of like summed it up, about how impactful the kind of the energy of a city can be, for sort of creativity.
Absolutely. I think just the kind of variety of different people's experiences that you encounter just in like the train to work, is really kind of, for me personally, makes me want to understand the commonalities between all these different people and the distinctions between all these different people, and just kind of gets things going, and just the pace and the energy of everything. It feels very lively and makes me want to create and go out and play shows and see bands and all of this.
I mean, going back to your sort of childhood and sort of you know formative influences, you know what was that like? What kind of inspired you sort of back in the in the really sort of young days?
I mean, mostly, and this is kind of the thread through most of my life, is but it's pretty much whatever my parents were listening to, and especially my dad would like pick up on when I liked something, and then try and like give me more things that would expand that. So I mean, you know, growing up in the house, it was very much like punk music, post-punk, new wave, but also my dad's always been someone that wants to keep up with what's going on as it's happening. So, you know, as I'm in like high school, he's like, hey, like maybe you should check out Arcade Fire or Beach House, or, you know. And so I feel like most of the cool music that I listen to, even if it's like I'm supposed to be the one telling him about it, he's like already been there for months. So I'm very fortunate to have that, even though I do feel like a square a lot of the time. But yeah, I mean, growing up, like certainly, you know, I feel like part of the kind of origin story of this band is kind of re-encountering these new wave songs that I hadn't heard since I was very young. And it's sort of just it being like kind of zapping me back in time to my youth, and also just presenting synth music in a way that felt very different from what it felt like I was being exposed to at the time of like the mid-aught teens.
What do you think it was because I mean your previous band, Static Jacks, was more of a let's say you know indie kind of sort of rock band. I mean, what was it that kind of really you know attracted to you and kind of like you know kind of captured something in your mind about, say, the you know the sort of the synth and that sort of that sort of sound, if you will?
I mean, I think part of it was the fact that just in terms of having been writing and listening to just guitar music for so long, I, not being very good at guitar, had really hit my limit of what I could do. And so I felt like I was always writing the same thing over and over again. And so it really started, like when it hit me, the first thing it sparked was like, oh, this would be a fun writing experiment to try and write something that was more like bass guitar and sort of synth sound driven. And very simple, because you know the first things I was really getting into at that time were like the Human League album Reproduction, or the first OMD record, which are very kind of sparse, and that's kind of what appealed to me also, is coming from the fact that I was largely just listening to guitar punk music. I wanted things that felt raw and bare, and the fact that both of those records were doing that, but with sounds that were not, you know, like of this world. Spoke to me powerfully.
That's really interesting. I mean, I kind of like well, when I was listening, I grew up, I was sort of classically trained, you know, because like my dad was, you know, he sort of sung in a choir. That was his sort of thing, and you know, he sort of put I was going to say he pushed me into the chair. He actually did, you know, he kind of like he encouraged, but it felt at the time like I was sort of being pushed into it. You know, and I played that for probably about 8 or 9 years, and it was you know, I got to a sort of pretty good standard with it, but I had this sort of love of punk rock music. That was what really kind of spoke to me. And I remember then I think for quite a while, I was sort of quite narrow-minded in what I was listening to and what I was prepared to like. Almost, it's just like, no, I can't like that because that's got this sort of style of guitar in it. It's like, no, I can't do. But the sort of the synth wave, that early sort of synth wave. Talk about stuff that I didn't relate to. So like kind of late 70s, Tangerine Dream. Which I now listen to, because like that sort of ambient is just fantastic. But at that time, that just wasn't my cup of tea. But the early sort of Depeche Mode, the OMD, Human League, that sort of genre, if you will, really, kind of, like I said at the start, kind of captured something of this sort of futuristic. It was really, just at that time, that did kind of get me. It was it's kind of interesting how it sort of came about for me.
I mean, it is funny that I feel like, in my younger years, I would often be like, very close-minded about specific things, but invariably the thing I didn't really like became the next thing I was into. And I'd be like, now that's the only thing I want to listen to. So it's just like basically like jumping like island to island, like trying to craft an identity. And, ultimately realizing that all of these things can relate and they're much more interesting when you try and draw connections between all these things and unite them in different ways. But I definitely relate to the like, oh, if it's got that, it's not for me.
It's not for me. I would never be seen dead listening to that.
Yeah.
Actually, do you know what? I remember when I was at school, I was maybe 15 or so, and I've always been sort of quite an introvert, and when I was younger, I was certainly an introvert, and sort of back in my day, we used to like have these, kind of school bags, and you'd write your favorite bands on them, just kind of graffiti on them. And I dared to put on some fairly sort of eclectic stuff at that time, like kind of Teardrop Explodes, coupled with, I don't know, like The Clash or something like that. And I remember getting humiliated by sort of like a fellow school kid. Like he was I played football with him, and he just sort of like humiliated me. I was just like, oh my god, don't ever do that again. But that was I don't know, that was a kind of fun time of sort of music, almost of sort of exploration that I think it does a lot to kind of explore those sort of things, which is what you've been doing, and I'm interested about that kind of identity as well. And do you still think that you're kind of shifting your identity and sort of like on the search for new things, and as you're evolving as a person?
I mean, I think a lot of, especially in the last few years, I feel like a lot of what I've been doing has aired more on the side of and it's kind of, I think, like audible in kind of how the two albums progress, in a sense, where it feels like I'll get into something and then I'll want to trace back the thing that those people were listening to, and then like kind of just like skip my way back through the evolution of music and appreciate the fact that it's never, like, it almost seems to just get more interesting the further back you dig, and more sort of free form. And but I mean, I think at the same time, I have been trying to, like, I don't want to be someone that's just listening to old music.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I should probably just call up my dad and be like, what's happened? What's going on with the kids these days?
Yeah, tell me, where do I get all this info? How you accept the influence of older kind of music, but that you don't want to be nostalgic. too nostalgic about it. It's got to, have your own kind of mark, and I guess that word identity, your own sort of identity on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think because nostalgia it's a word that people use a lot in association with the band, which I'm like okay with. It has never really been like a dirty word to me. But I think there's a sort of like form and function meeting in the sense of so many of the songs feel like they're about, kind of like longing and existential crisis and comparing where you're at now to where you were before, where you might be in the future.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that oftentimes like synth music, new wave music also is inspiring nostalgia. These things kind of like meet and work well together. But I think one of the things that helps it is in terms of not just being like, I was very relieved when we started putting out music that people weren't like, oh, this is just like an 80s ripoff band.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I like those bands, but I don't like they're a part of what's going into it. And I feel like there was a interview I was listening to once with the writer Malcolm Gladwell, and he was talking about how he kind of has this theory that the music you listen to between like 13 and 19 sort of charts the direction of the music you'll be into for much of the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I feel like, the first album is inspired by these new wave bands, second album by these like sort of more crowdy electronic bands. But it is, in my mind, kind of all through the lens of bands like, like The National, like Arcade Fire, like The Strokes. And I feel like they have sort of an indelible imprint on how I think about music. And so I think those things are united in a way that makes it not just feel like a purely nostalgic endeavor of like me trying to be the 80s or something.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree as well. And I mean, there's that sort of, I think it's Picasso, isn't it? It's sort of quote that, nothing is original, and I forget what the quote is about, sort of stealing, but basically about stealing other people's, artwork, and kind of like sort of concepts and things like that. It's totally fine. And it is very, very difficult to be complete. And in fact, it's probably impossible to be completely original in what you're doing. I think, and I totally hear you, what you're saying about, using those sort of influences, and you're talking about kind of right through, a period of, kind of 20 years or so.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it. It's interesting that you mentioned that those sort of bands, the the Strokes, and again that New York sort of influence. I don't know if you've read Lizzie Goodman's book, Meet Me in the Bathroom.
I haven't read it, but I own it.
Oh dear, yeah. I mean, I love that book. I thought it was just fantastic. But I mean, I've got a real sort of love for New York, and it there are so many periods of music that have just, it's like sort of changed the world.
Yeah.
It really
Absolutely.
has. I mean, it's and it's like I was listening to to your latest record, and there's this. It's very kind of like evocative. It's just kind of so evocative. I think also like the way that you use the kind of like the arpeggios and the sort of the chord major minor sort of changes, and also sort of with the vocals, it just makes it so evocative. It sort of takes you back to a time, but it also makes you think of the of the future, and also what's kind of going on now. I think with your lyrics and the way that there's kind of social commentary that, of issues that are important to you going on through them.
Yeah. I definitely, it is funny how like there is something about synth arpeggios that both like speaks to the past and the future at the same time in a way that's it's like I really don't know what it is, but
it is hard. It's hard to put your finger on what it but it definitely does seem to do that.
Yeah. And what's been very cool for me in terms of particularly I feel like in a podcast about like experimentation and now talking about that sort of New York thing of that scene is like through this project I've gotten to know Fabrizio Moretti from the Strokes, and we put out an album together as a band called Machinegum, which was very cool in the sense that it was much more like kind of access a different part of my own brain in terms of being a more collaborative thing, whereas Nation of Language is a more singular thing. And so getting to at all feel like I like touched that in real life and in a way that was part of something very kind of experimental was a really cool experience.
I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned about about sort of different collaborations, because on the one hand, I mean, you've got collaborations you're sort of dealing with your own bandmates, and then kind of outside of that, all the different sort of personalities, and influences that they have in their lives, in their kind of music lives as well. It's really kind of interesting how you can sort of tap into those and sort of use those in a different way.
Yeah, and it is it's funny because like having been, I feel like in the full range of like fully collaborative to there's like kind of a leader to one person is doing everything. Having been in like all of those experiences through my time in music, it is funny how, it is like super challenging and at times frustrating to work like that. But then you do get someone like coming out of nowhere with something that's just so cool to you and changes how you're looking at everything that you're making. And I really found that like what was nice about doing Nation of Language and Machinegum at the same time. And then I was also, while I was doing that for a while, I was playing bass in another friend's band, but that was an even different experience because all of the parts were already written. I was just showing up and playing the shows. And so having those like the sort of like isolated writing experience of Nation of Language with the more collaborative experience of Machinegum, and then playing bass parts that is just like, I don't even have to think. I can just sort of like feel the parts that are presented to me. Yeah. It was really nice it was like all different parts of my musical brain being fired at once. And I feel like helped me appreciate the nice things about each of those situations as I was in them.
I think that's brilliant that you've done that. I love that idea, and it's not easy either. I mean, I especially those sort of situations where you've been used to kind of creating and like let's say sort of having a say in something, or even being the leader and saying this is how it's going to work, going to the other extreme, which is where you just you show up and you play what's been kind of given to you. It's a completely different mindset that you have, isn't it?
And is like super fun. And the fact that I feel like you really come to appreciate the person on the other side of each role, because you have been the person on the other side of each role. So you're like, man, like someone who actually like practiced the parts before they showed up and is willing to say yes to any show and just like come play it. It's like, as someone who's trying to like create something and get it out into the world and get it off the ground, is like the most, you're like, how did I get blessed with meeting this person who is just like down to help me do my thing? And so then I have always wanted to be that person to as many people as possible. because I feel like I owe it to the universe to just like
Yeah.
help them keep going on their endeavor.
I think what's sort of speaking to me there is your empathy, you know, and being able to sort of see things from somebody else's perspective, which, you know, I guess in most group and kind of collaborative situations, that's you know, the way you get things, the way that you get things done. You know, sort of seeing that. Having said that, I mean, I do I know Youth from Killing Joke quite well, and we do you know, we're involved in a like an arts and counterculture magazine, but
Cool.
he you know, sort of quite openly said about, you know, Killing Joke, their sort of process, it's like being in the snake pit. You know, there's not, it's like a real kind of like fight, but that for them is what gives them their kind of real energy and kind of creativity. And I guess it's personality driven, you know, you know, very strong personalities sort of coming together and eventually molding something out of that kind of tension, I guess.
For sure.
Everybody's different.
And like, yeah, like finding, you know, it is like, if that is the thing that really brings it out of you, it's an amazing thing to find other people that like can work like that. Because I feel like it is, you know, like there's nothing kind of scarier than when one person in the group likes to work like that and someone else really doesn't.
Yes, I mean, that's gonna be tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously, over this sort of period, you've not had, you know, you're not. I mean, it's been you've spoken about it a lot, but you've not had the chance to sort of play live. You know, how have you dealt with that? How's your resilience been in sort of, you know, kind of dealing with that and just, you know, kind of saying, okay, I accept, because it's been a very difficult time, obviously, you know, and must have been very frustrating. How have you managed to, I guess, kind of get through that?
I mean, it was not easy because, you know, I basically felt like we were primarily a band that should be experienced live for like when it was getting started. That was kind of like the point, was to be able to. That was what we want to do. Yeah. And that was always how we felt like we would kind of earn new fans, was just like getting in front of people, even if it was like not very many people in a room, and just kind of like proving ourselves. And so, you know, we had announced the first record and it was supposed to come out in like April of 2020. And we were like 3 shows into a tour when everything closed down.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like, that's it. Like, once it became clear that the world wasn't going to open up again in like a month, and that it was just going to be sort of an indeterminate amount of time, I was like, this is like, feels like the only tool in our toolbox to let anyone know about the band. And we had poured so much of our time and like energy and money into making this one record that I really thought, I was like, well, just bad timing, I guess. But we were just super fortunate in that, like, at radio and people online found it and would write about it and talk about it. And it really just sort of like took on this life of its own, and not being able to go out and experience that was very surreal. It was like someone calling and being like, hey, just so you know, like, all your dreams are coming true, but like, you can't experience it in real time. You can't like look at the people in the face and like know that they're appreciating the music. Just like stay home and believe it. I was like, this is kind of hard, but I mean, yeah, we just, with all of that energy of like wishing we could be touring and seeing everyone, instead we just went right back into the studio and started work on the next album. And so thankfully we were able to tour in the US in October, which was like surreal and fantastic. like the idea of, most people that listen to the band started during the pandemic. And so to go from really never selling out any show ever before the pandemic to then coming out of it. And one of the first shows coming out we play is a sold out night at Bowery Ballroom in New York City, which is like a venue that has been so close to my heart for so many years. I was like, aren't there like some steps in between that and like, shouldn't we have played some like middle-sized venues or like sold out a show like at some point? And so there's this like very weird thing happening of it's been different approaching it. And this was something that was very interesting to kind of learn over the course of tour. Was I had always approached shows from the perspective of, these people don't know who I am. I have to convince them to like me, kind of. And now to play the show, you're like, oh, like everyone here already knows the music. And so my job is now to kind of deliver on what I imagine their hopes are for like
I understand
how this experience can be meaningful in a live setting. And so that just like as a the sort of live performer side of my head had a very kind of interesting and engaging time interacting with that concept. Because not being able to play really did make me appreciate kind of I always thought of writing music and playing it as one kind of art together. And being able to only write and not play live really made me appreciate the degree to which they're related, but there's a sort of distinct part of me that really needs to be doing that in order to get the satisfaction out of making music. And so just being able to come back and do it again has been like super fulfilling.
That must have been, I mean, when you're talking about that shift in your mind from, okay, well, people don't know who we are, to pretty much the opposite. It's like
they know the words. So if I mess up, they know.
Yeah, that's where you get to do a sing-along, isn't it?
Yeah.
But to kind of, I mean that to me, in terms of what we're talking about mindsets, that shows great, kind of adaptability and adapting to expectations from having, expectations. Okay, well, people don't know who we are, so we'll just go and kind of give it a shot. Let's see how it goes. To like, whoa, people know the words. They know all the words of everything. Yeah. I mean, that kind of shows real adaptability for me. I like that.
Yeah, it's like a very cool thing to step into those like new shoes and like sort of look at the world from that perspective.
And what was it? I mean, coming away from those sort of shows, I mean, the feeling must have just been immense.
Oh yeah, it's
different
like,
level.
You can definitely like see how it makes some people, become different. To like you do feel, you're making this music, you're kind of airing these parts of yourself, and to then, in the purest way, to see that people connect with that and share that is amazing. But there's definitely like, you could see how a person would slip into delusions of grandeur when you feel like you're no longer the scrappy person trying to be like, look at me, but you're like, yes, continue to look at me. I have brought you all here. So
that's incredible. That's incredible.
Check in 5 years when I'm a cult leader.
When you're a cult leader. You heard it here first, listeners.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, where do you go for your sort of inspiration for, kind of creativity? What is it that sort of keeps you alive creatively?
I think one of the main things for me is I've realized, especially not being able to do it over lockdown, is being able to be in bookstores, record stores, museums, just any place where I can see the the works of people who just kind of like went ahead and did it,
Yeah.
Like it's, you look at all these things, you're like, oh, this is the kind of there's so many different ideas in this space and they're all living together, and like this is the payoff for like hard work and continued hunger to learn new things and express new things, and really kind of feeling surrounded by all of it makes me want to fight to have like my own place in it somehow, just in the world of artistic experience. And particularly there was some movie from a few years ago that I was watching, and this artist person is being asked like what their dream was, and they said their dream was to have a body of work. And I thought that was such a cool idea that even if it's not like very well known, the idea that you could look back on the things that you've created through time and try and see patterns, and also transport yourself back to where you were in those different moments.
In those moments. Yeah,
was like a very cool concept to me, and has always made me want to kind of write more and more, because so often you don't feel your developments as they're happening. Sometimes it's conscious in terms of being like, oh, I'm going to write this kind of song that I haven't really written before. But so often you're like, oh, like over this period, I really started to do this thing with the bass guitar more than I ever had before, and I don't really do it anymore. And it's like, what was going on then that had me doing that,
It's interesting. I think the podcast episode that's out at the moment is with Andrew Savage, who's the singer with Parquet Courts, and he was saying about his art and also the music as well, but the physicality of it. And you remind me when you were talking about kind of going to museums and galleries and stuff. About say for his art, you see the physical paintbrushes, the brush strokes, you can physically kind of see that. And he was talking about in the context of people appreciating the creativity that goes on, in producing a painting or a piece of music. You can kind of see that, but it's again, it's almost like looking back and you see that kind of physicality.
Yeah.
It's that's a period in your life when you did that kind of represents you, and that's kind of quite inspiring thinking about that.
Yeah, and it's cool like that you mentioned him, because I feel like he is a good example of someone who, because he's both a visual artist and a musician, and has Parquet Courts has his solo music, where it feels like he is not tied down to one, like all of the things seem to feed into each other. And the Parquet Courts artwork is, from what I understand, all done by him. And it's always so cool. The human performance artwork was like amazing. And so that's always like, I've always made all of the visual elements of Nation of Language stuff. And for a while it was simply because I was like, well, there's got to be artwork for this. So, and like, someone's got to do it. I guess I'll do it. And like, I have no training in it, which I'm always kind of more flattered when someone's like, I love your visuals. Cause I'm like, wow, I really don't know what I'm doing. So that's amazing. That's great. Like, it's like you'll notice that we use a lot of straight lines and plain text.
Yeah.
And it's because you're essentially seeing the limits of my ability to make visual art, and that really, thankfully, it serves the music, I think, and is something that I like. I like minimalistic, simple things. And thank goodness I do, because
absolutely. No, I think you're totally right there. I mean, I think that's a really good point. It's you know, you can see the, or hear the, you know, the minimalism elements in your music. And yeah, I'm glad you brought up the art, because I was going to ask you about that. But that does come through in the artwork as well. There is that kind of relationship, which I'm really interested in, this sort of relationship between art and visual and sound, visual and oral, I guess. You know, how they work together in the brain, you know, to kind of bring things together.
Yeah. I mean, I one thing that I will always appreciate about something that Fab Moretti had expressed to me when I was like trying to make artwork for the first album cover, and like sent him a draft of something, and he was like, I mean, it's cool, but like, this is your first album cover, like don't just go with your first idea that seems cool. Like, you know, let this be an opportunity for you to like permit yourself to see yourself as a complete artist, and like how, like, take a few days and just get a notebook and be like, how does this music translate visually? Like, what does it mean to me? What's a way to see that on a page? And just sort of the permission to expand beyond what you think you are artistically is always something that I very much appreciate about his outlook on life in general. Is he really believes in everyone's ability to kind of find a way to express themselves in a world where I feel like so much of the expression that gets done is more in, like, there's so many distractions in terms of the internet and television and everything, that it can be hard to find the time to let yourself just sit and think and make something.
And did that sort of first draft that you sent him, how did that I mean, how did that compare to what turned up on the album?
I mean, I think the only similarity was the sense that I knew I wanted the kind of text to be very, like, I think the layout of the text itself was the only thing that was the same, probably. And ultimately for that artwork, what I kind of came to was, you know, there's the white box going around the outside, and it's a photo that I took in Japan in like 2014 or something. And I don't know if I was trying to take a picture of something and someone moved in front of the camera, or I was trying to take a picture of someone and they were like ran out of frame. But something about it, I was like, the fact that we, you know, use these arpeggios and these drum machines feels very rigid. And so, but then especially in the live performance, I'm kind of like all over the stage and it's very kind of kinetic. And so there's a sense of this like chaos and neatness living in the same space. Yeah. And also something about the photo feels very evocative to me in terms of like just kind of, I guess, like city living and nightlife and busyness and action and all of this. And so I was really grateful to be kind of like told to like, now you sit down and you do your work, because you're capable of this work, and so just do it.
I mean, you know, doing that is when I always sort of find when you start at that very kind of beginning, like it's just like almost overwhelming. It's like, oh my god, where do I start with this?
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Oh my god! And then it's like, well, have another go and see what comes to you. And it's like, I don't know what's going to come to me. You have no idea. And I think it's really weird. And I think that again, our sort of personalities of, some like order, some work better with structure, others, are kind of more comfortable with just sitting with things and then in the knowledge that something will come and inspire them. It must be kind of quite challenging.
Yeah, but I think it also, things like going to museums really helps when you're feeling that kind of lost, because you can just, like I used to think that, like when you went to a museum, you had to stand and look at every single painting, and like now, especially in, we'll go to like the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If you think you're going to stand and look at every piece of art, like you're never going to leave. And so I enjoy it much more now as kind of just like moving through the space and seeing, like, there's always something that just grabs you. And especially someone who's not really trained in art, it can be so much fun to then just zone in on that and be like, what about this is blowing my mind right now? And then, if you can figure out what about it is moving you, then you can try and bring that into your own experience somehow.
Would you see yourself as a risk taker?
I think so. I think as time has gone on, I am less willing to take risks if I feel like they don't serve a goal. Whereas I feel like when it comes to me, having decided like I want to be a musician, I want to be an artist, and now in service to that, I will really try to put myself out there and like lay it on the line. And I think having my wife Aiden in the band has also really helped with that, in terms of when the band was first starting, before she was even in it, it was a much more kind of timid thing. Like, I'm not good at telling people about myself, or people would be like, oh, what do you do? And I would just be like, I work in restaurants. Like I wouldn't even mention it. And, trying to like book our own shows, if people wouldn't respond, I would be like, oh my God, like it's over, they hate us. And she's like, what are you talking about?
Exactly,
just like, and so having someone who, like one of the first tours we went on was a tour that she booked in Europe, and which is like a weird thing for a band to basically only play local shows, and being like, all right, the next few shows are in Berlin, Milan, Paris, London. And that sort of like risky, some would say foolish sort of thinking, I feel like has really ended up paying off in the end. And so often when people ask me for kind of advice, I'm like, do something strange and like put yourself in the position to get lucky. Like, because we still have fans that we got from way back then, just from the novelty of us being like an American band in, say, Milan, or people here being like, yeah, they were just playing in Berlin. Like I guess they must be legit, because like they're not just playing in New York City anymore. And like, because so much of, I feel like making it to some level where you feel like you can continue to just like make art and it becomes a sustainable thing, is like getting lucky and meeting people. And so us just throwing ourselves into the abyss has almost always paid off in some way, even if it wasn't, the main way we were thinking. It's like you always meet somebody who 2 years down the line has, you reconnect again, and there's a great opportunity for the two of you to do something.
Yeah. I think, I like that. I like what you're saying there. And I think that, there is that sort of relationship between sort of taking a risk and sort of gut instinct, it just feels right. You can, it might sound kind of quite crazy and should we do it? Don't know. But something in just inside you is telling you that, it's kind of okay. I'm kind of quite. I'm a believer in gut instinct, but sometimes there's that sort of risk aversion in myself just sort of holds me back sometimes from some things.
Sure.
But sometimes when you're in that situation, you take a chance, and also like you say, sort of having Aidan there and having kind of Mike there, it's just that collective then helps you just to say, come on then, let's do it.
Yeah. It's funny because in so many other ways, like, like in this apartment, I feel like everyone I know in New York is like moving like every year. And we've been in the same apartment for 8 years. And I feel like it's part of it is because I feel like I need this to be my living situation to be stable so that I can take all of these other risks.
It's a good point. Yeah.
And so in some ways I feel very like risk averse and conservative in that way, in that I feel like if it's not, like this is it's a good place I can have my keyboards out. It's like, like this checks that box, and now let's see what crazy stuff we can get into.
Well, I guess in your mind, kind of going back, when like you say with kind of Nation of Language, that it kind of started as a kind of, should we call it a loose project, and then kind of like evolved into the the outfit that you are now. So you've almost like from the band's perspective, you've taken that risk of saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is us. This is us.
I mean, it started really as a songwriting experiment of trying to challenge myself and do something differently than what I had been doing. And I thankfully had friends around who were down to just like help me, take it from being simply an idea on my computer into something that could be performed. And who those people were was always kind of changing in and out. And actually, I really used to, write sort of with that utility in mind. It was like, in addition to the fact that I liked things that were simple, I wanted to only write things that were simple so that if someone couldn't be in the band anymore, but I knew someone that, like Aiden had never played synthesizer or keyboards or any instrument before joining the band. And the fact that I had intentionally written all of these things so that individually they're fairly simple, and then when you bring them together, it feels more complex. She was able to kind of come right into playing music through the band, and now she's like playing different things on different keyboards at the same time. It's been pretty amazing to watch the like meteoric growth.
Absolutely. That's incredible. Brilliant. That's been really, really great, Ian. Thanks so much for taking the time. It's been wonderful talking to you. Honestly, it's been really, really fascinating listening to you.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Not at all. So I will hopefully see you in London.
Oh, awesome.
Let's hope so. Yeah. That we can do it. Fingers crossed. Great stuff. All right, Ian, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, man.
Bye now.
Thanks for listening to the show, and I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll tune in for the next episode. In the meantime, it would be really awesome if you could rate and review the show, and also share it with any friends who you think might enjoy it.